Hello and welcome to FPL Mate, your best mate for fantasy Premier League content for the 2022-23 season. My name is Dan and it's time for the Game Week 25 episode of Buy, Sell, Keep, Avoid, where we have a look at some potential transfer moves that we should and shouldn't be making. If you do enjoy this one, please do leave a like, please do subscribe if you're new around here. But without further ado, guys, let's have a look at the rules of the video. So buys are players you probably don't have but should consider bringing in, sells are players you probably have but should consider removing, keeps are players that you might be thinking about removing but I think you should keep them, and avoids are players that are pretty hyped up right now. I think are potential traps that maybe you should avoid. So 2 players in each category. Let's start off with some buys. Okay, so our buys today are assuming that you already have triple Arsenal, 3 Arsenal players. I think they're probably going to be the priority moves this week, but I know most of you guys have got them already. If you haven't, Saka is your priority pick. But assuming you got your Arsenal boys sorted, how about Mo Salah? Another potential captaincy option for Game Week 25 alongside Saka. Got this nice double game week against Crystal Palace and Wolves. It's not too bad. And although Salah hasn't been at his absolute best recently, what we have seen from Salah this season is that occasionally he does go off, he does go crazy with a huge FPL score. We know he's on penalties, which always helps. 2 games, which means double the chances of getting those penalties, hitting one of those huge single game week scores. You know, it could even have 2 in 1 game week potentially there, which is always really, really good. So we know Salah can do it. Can we hit him at the right moment? We've got extra chances with the double game week. Now, what we also know is that Salah is nailed on, which is something you can't really say about any of the other Liverpool attackers, especially with so many other Liverpool attackers coming back from injury. Salah seems to be the only guy capable of playing on that right wing, really. So whereas you've got in the striker position, you can have Nunez there, you can have Jota potentially there, you can have Firmino there. On the left-hand side, we've seen Jota play there, we've seen Hakpo play there more recently. Darwin Núñez could play there as well, and Jota. Yeah, like there's players in all of the positions other than right wing, which Salah just seems to have absolutely locked down. So you've got a nailed on player for a double game week, and that is always half of the battle, getting that player who is going to be playing the maximum amount of minutes. We've got a player on penalties. We've got a player who we know is capable of those huge FPL scores. We've seen it time and time and again. And although we have to admit that Salah is not the player he once was in a double game week, let's see what we can get from him. It could be pretty big. The models and predictions are suggesting that Salah is going to be one of the top scoring players for Game Week 25, and I feel like you can own him in the future as well. Keep him for a little bit longer. My other buy is James Tarkowski, so he is going to be the #1 defensive pick, I think, in my opinion. We've already seen that Everton defensively, since Sean Dyche has come in, has really, really improved. 2 clean sheets in 3 is really, really positive thing. The 2 fixtures we've got in the double game week, Aston Villa and Arsenal. Arsenal are a team that Everton have actually already kept a clean sheet against. So, look, clean sheets very much possible in these games. You would say that Aston Villa game is more likely of a clean sheet, maybe Arsenal not so much. But yeah, there's potential there. There's the fact that we've got future game weeks here that are not so bad. Game week 26 against Forest, that's a decent fixture where you can play Tarkowski again. And in game week 28, where we're going to have a lot of teams actually blanking, in game week 28, Tarkowski is going to get that fixture against Chelsea. And Chelsea are struggling a little bit for goals there as well. So you maybe think Everton could potentially keep a clean sheet there. We also have the fact that he's so cheap, 4.3 million. Even if you don't want to play him every single game week, he's cheap enough that he's not going to have a major impact on your budget and moving around your money into other positions. Tarkowski is that cheap player, and in fact, by buying Tarkowski, it's more than likely that you're actually downgrading one of your other players and freeing up more money just by bringing in a player who is actually good. But here is the greatest thing of all about Tarkowski, and that is the fact that under Sean Dyche, he is the #1 attacking threat in the entirety of the Everton team. Now, maybe that says more about Everton than it does about Tarkowski, but what it does tell us that, looking at these numbers, guys, 0.74 XG, 0.69 XA, that's actually really, really good for a defender, especially a defender this cheap. And when we get a defender who does score a goal, you know you get loads of points. You get a 15-pointer in a single game week if a defender can keep a clean sheet and gets a goal. It's rare that it happens, but we've got to be in it to win it, and we've got to pick those players who are most likely to do this. And Tarkowski is on the end of seemingly every set piece that Everton are taking right now. This Everton team seems to be built around set pieces a lot of the time. So the potential for Tarkowski to get an attacking return is pretty good for a defender, but for a defender this cheap, for a defender on a double game week, it is just such a good opportunity to potentially get very lucky with a goal. And I think you've got to be in it to win it. And so all in all, guys, I'm saying get in it. Get in Tarkowski. On to some sells. We're going to start you off with Fabian Schär, obviously a 5.2 million defender who doesn't have a fixture in Game Week 25. And I know some of you guys are going to have Botman as well, maybe Burn. These are the kind of Newcastle defenders I would be willing to sacrifice this week. And it's difficult to say who you should sacrifice this week, but what I would say about Newcastle players is that because they don't have a double game week in 27, like Brighton do and like Brentford do, it's perhaps a little bit easier to sacrifice Newcastle players because we've got a blank here, but we've also got a bad fixture in 26, and in 27 we don't have a double. So over the next 3, Newcastle players are not going to be higher priority than your Brighton players and your Brentford players that you might be benching right now. So sell Schär, get a new player who's got a double game week. You know, Tarkowski is calling all of our names, and then you have a player for that, and you get to keep your future double game week players on your bench, which I think is pretty good. Now, I think there's also opportunities to maybe free hit Fabian Schär back in game week 28, for example, if you are free hitting in 28, or if you're wildcarding in 27, maybe that is a time where you could bring back some of your Newcastle players, and in that case maybe you could even consider selling the likes of Trippier as well, particularly if it is a money constraint and you do need to free up some cash to make some other moves. Maybe there is an opportunity there to actually sell Trippier if you're going to have that opportunity to get him back fairly soon as well. But as for Fabian Schär, as for Botman, these are the kind of players that I think for most people you're going to be fine to sell these guys. These are probably going to be your priority sells out of your blanking players, so I think they should go. So sell Fabian Schär or any other Newcastle defender you have, including potentially Trippier, depending on how you're set up, how you're planning forward. And my next sell is going to be Nick Pope, which I admit is a little bit of a cheat from me, going for another Newcastle defender. But this one is a goalkeeper, so it's technically not cheating. But it was really difficult for me to actually say what other kind of players you guys should be selling, because it is going to massively depend on your team, really, and how you're freeing up money. So, for example, Bruno Fernandes, he is an absolute fine player to sell if you're bringing in someone like, Saka or Salah. If you need to sell Fernandes to do that, then yeah, Fernandes is a sell. Luke Shaw, if he is your most expensive defender you have right now and the only way of financing certain other moves, then yeah, you can sell Luke Shaw. And even like, Brentford players, Brighton players, you can sell them as long as you're wildcarding them back in game week 27. But that's so team dependent. And the one other player who I thought about putting in this category is Kevin De Bruyne, who is unfortunately injured. We don't think he's going to be available in game week 25, which I think does turn De Bruyne into a sell. But because he's injured, again, feels like cheating putting an injured player in the sell category, because of course we're going to sell injured players, right? It is so obvious. You don't need me to sit here and say sell De Bruyne. We know that already. So, yeah, we've gone for Pope. I think this could be an opportunity for some people who are maybe not totally pleased with Pope recently to maybe get rid of him. Obviously, he has been keeping clean sheets, but he hasn't been making saves. He's making less than a save per game week, and he's not getting those save points, which is not ideal. But when he loses his clean sheet, he kind of loses everything, which is kind of compared to the likes of Kepa, who might not keep a clean sheet every week. Then again, neither is Pope. But Kepa is getting those really nice scores. So if you've been waiting for an opportunity to get the likes of Kepa, then maybe this is your time, and to sell Pope in order to do that. There's also players like Alisson or Pickford who have double game weeks this week. I know a few of you guys are thinking about going for players like that. I think there's possibility to go for some of those players as well, depending on how your team is set up. Obviously, Pickford is nice and cheap. Alisson a little bit expensive, probably not a long-term player you'd want to own, particularly that Liverpool's defence is just so bad, and you're not going to get too many points from Alisson, you wouldn't think. But Pickford, I think, is not so bad. But yeah, that's going to depend on you a little bit. But Pope, for me, is a goalkeeper that I would sell if I had him right now. De Gea as well, if you have him, I would probably sell him as well, because I think there's other kind of players who will have fixtures in game week 28, who have, decent enough fixtures over the next few game weeks as well, that are worth going for. All right, so I know a lot of people are selling MAHREZ, but I think you should keep him. In fact, I'm kind of, in a way, a little bit jealous of those who own MAHREZ, because he solves a problem. Like, a lot of people are struggling to have 11 players with fixtures in game week 25, whereas MAHREZ, he does have a fixture. It's not like he's got a blank. People are kind of worried about him not playing in game week 24, but I think the fact that he was rested against Nottingham Forest actually increases his chances of getting some game time in 25, particularly with the likes of Kevin De Bruyne out of action. MAHREZ could be even more important than ever, so I do think that MAHREZ has a very good chance of actually starting against Bournemouth, and although it's not guaranteed, the risk that you're taking here is that if MAHREZ does start against Bournemouth, he has got a good chance of doing a lot. His underlying numbers are good. We know he's scoring goals and getting assists. Bournemouth are one of the weakest teams in the league. You can imagine that Man City could win this game, 2-3, 4-0, maybe even more. And if MAHREZ is starting, even coming off the bench, he's going to be a huge part of that. So MAHREZ is that high-risk, high-reward player that you already have in your team. And there is a big difference between a high-risk, high-reward player that you already have in your team than taking -4s to bring in players who are high-risk, low-reward players. Look, there are other players that I know people are going for in terms of Wolves midfielders, Everton midfielders, maybe Liverpool midfielders to a degree there as well. Those guys are presenting just as much risk as MAHREZ. They may be guaranteed the base amount of 3 or 4 FPL points, but they don't have the same potential of MAHREZ, even in a single game week, to go crazy, get that 15-pointer, get that 20-pointer. It is totally possible. And a couple of weeks ago, we would not even be thinking about selling MAHREZ ahead of a game like Bournemouth. So I don't think things have changed that much. I think that if MAHREZ is one of your 11 playing players, I don't think you need to kind of remove him as well. I think the fact that he is technically a player with a fixture is good enough to keep him, and the potential for a huge haul here is a risk that I would be willing to take if I already had MAHREZ. Would I be buying him? Probably not. Rashford is also a player I'd keep, and out of all of the blanking players in Game Week 25, Rashford is the one guy who I would definitely keep. I think there is argument to be made about selling every single other one of the Game Week 25 blankers. It's going to depend on your circumstance, but I think arguments can be made for other players. But I don't think there's any argument that I can think of right now that will justify selling Marcus Rashford. And the main reason for that is that if you sell him now, you are going to have to buy him back in Game Week 26. Marcus Rashford is arguably the most important player in FPL right now. I think he has overtaken Erling Haaland, and he's got a game against Liverpool, the high line of Liverpool, the weak defence of Liverpool in Game Week 26 immediately after this blank Game Week 25. If you sell Rashford now, you are going to have to buy him back for Game Week 26. And to oversimplify this, each transfer is worth 4 points, because when you make a transfer, if you make an additional transfer, it costs you 4 points from your team, right? And you are going to be making additional transfers throughout the season. So if you transfer out Rashford and you have to transfer him back in again in 26, that means that those 2 transfers are costing you essentially 8 points. And like I say, I know this is an oversimplification of this. It might not work exactly like this for everyone, but in most scenarios, you are going to basically need a Game Week 25 player who is going to score you 8 points. Now, who are we confident is going to score 8 points in Game Week 25? Salah? Yes. Saka? Yes. Maybe Odegaard? Yes. These are the big 3, the 3 big midfielders of the week. Everyone after that is really, really risky as to whether they are going to touch the likes of 8 points. And in ordinary circumstances, they don't touch 8 points. They don't do that even in 2 game weeks next to each other. Back-to-back game weeks, they won't do 8 points over 2 game weeks. So they won't do it in a double game week either. So, really, there is not many players, if any players, really, outside of the big 3, that are worth the 8 points that you will need to sacrifice Rashford for 1 game week only. So it just doesn't seem worth it to me. I don't like it. You may as well keep Rashford. If you've got to sell players to make a full 11 playing players in game week 25, sell someone else. You are going to have players who don't have a fixture on your bench this game week, right? Why not make Marcus Rashford one of those bench players? On to some avoids, and it's time for a bit of a rant, because I know a lot of people are buying the likes of Neves, and I'm picking on Neves here, but really what I mean is so many players in the Neves mold. We're talking about Neves, we're talking about Sarabia, we're talking about Cunha, we're talking about Iwobi, we're talking about Morpay, McNeil, Semedo even. We could go on and on and on about all of these players that are kind of players that you would never pick normally. Never in a million years would you be picking a Neves or a McNeil or whoever else if they didn't have a double game week. And I feel like you have to ask yourself, why do you never pick these players? Well, it's usually because these players pretty much score 2 points every single game week. So when it comes to a double game week, they are probably going to score 4 points. Now, yes, they have got an increased chance of an FPL return, but say that they have a 1 in 10 chance of getting an FPL return in any given game week. Now they've got a 1 in 5% chance of getting an FPL return, and 4 out of 5 times they are still going to score you a solid 4 points. Still far more likely to get that 4-pointer than hit that return. And the problem is here, I spoke about earlier about high risk, high reward players. Please do not confuse the likes of MAHREZ as a high risk, high reward player, because he's not really that at all. Because the best case scenario here is that he gets an assist in one of the games, and that gives him a total of 7 points. That's not a particularly high reward, really. Even if he scores a goal, the chances of it happening are so low. On average, you are always going to lose out. You're always going to, average out, 4 or 5 points, really, 6 points for MAHREZ. That's kind of the best case reward that you're going to get. Yes, we have seen MAHREZ score a couple of goals this season, but they often are really unpredictable goals, or when he's playing it slightly further forward, which he has done in the past. He hasn't really been playing there over the last couple of games. He's dropped back into defensive midfielder. Why are you considering defensive midfielders, players you would never consider before, just because they have a double game week? I truly, strongly feel like, yes, I understand going for some differentials on a double game week, trying to attack those double game weeks, but if you would never consider them in a million years for a single game week, why are you suddenly considering them for a double game week? I understand those kind of players. There are some players that maybe you thought about for a single game week. Fair enough. If you want to go for them for a double, I completely understand, but a double doesn't change everything, and there is such things as double game week traps, and we've seen this time and time again. We've seen that this season. I know we've seen it, a few times. We've seen Fulham players when they had a double, Chelsea attackers when they had a double game week, and we've seen certain other teams provide loads of double game week traps, and I feel like these kind of players just scream. They're so obvious, and for a fact that one of all of these players, one of, Cunha, Neves, McNeil, Iwobi, or etc., Semedo, if you like, in defence, Morpay, one of these players will score well. Probably. One of them will. And people will say to me, Dan, you were wrong. That guy who scored well, what about all of the other ones? All that happened there is that the 1 in 5 players ended up scoring the points in a 1 in 5 chance. Each individual player has 1 in 5 chance of, getting anything from this game week. One of them might, but the chances of you getting the right one is pretty low. So yeah, rant over. I do not like these picks at all. I will never pick a player for a double game week that I would never consider in a million years on a single game week. Okay, final pick of the video. It is Cody Gakpo as an avoid, and it is the big controversial one in the video. So, first of all, I should note that when I say he's an avoid, it's like a soft avoid. More than a hard avoid, it's more of a soft avoid, because I do understand that there are certain scenarios where Gakpo could be a good pick to go for, particularly if you're planning a wild card soon. Going for Gakpo, going for those Liverpool defenders, that's fine. These are not players you want to have in your team long term, but we know that they could do pretty well in the very, very short term anyway. So yeah, understand that this is not one size fits all kind of advice or opinions, I guess, but I do want to talk a little bit about why I personally will not be going for Gakpo. Now, first of all, I'm not planning to wildcard anytime soon. Looking at the new double game weeks that have been announced, I do feel like I am starting to favour a later wildcard into a bench boost in game week 33 and 34. So not really going to have the opportunity to remove some of these players. And I know some people are targeting game week 28 as well, trying to pick some players out who actually have a fixture then. Liverpool are not guaranteed a fixture in game week 28 right now, and even more so, well, I mean, Gakpo is just not like nailed on long term, and I'm even concerned that he's not nailed on short term, because we have already seen Jota and Firmino building their fitness, getting more and more game time over the last few weeks, and it's a matter of time before they take Gakpo's place. Now, we already know, Liverpool fans, you'll know this more than anyone, that Gakpo was brought into Liverpool as a backup, as a second string player covering those injured players, and when the injured players return, we knew that Gakpo was going to move to the bench, be a little bit of a one for the future rather than one for right now, and that's fine. Everyone is fine with that. What we see with Gakpo, therefore, is that even in game week 25, he's not getting 180 minutes. We've already seen that he's only getting 60, 70 minutes per game, which you can look at his stats, you can look at his numbers and say, hey, he's been doing really well. The numbers start to mean less and less and less the more the minutes are dwindled. I can definitely see Jota coming in and playing on the left wing, or maybe Darwin playing on the left wing for one of these games instead of Gakpo, which reduces his minutes, reduces his game time even more. And we start to see a bit of a problem. Then going into future game weeks, game week 26 against Man United, not even a particularly good fixtures. Could we see that, you know, Diaz comes back into the team by this point? Quite possibly. Game against Bournemouth. Is Diaz back by this point? Yeah, maybe. Game week 28, if it even goes ahead. Suddenly, Gakpo is kind of a blast from the past, kind of irrelevant, and actually a player that you're forced to remove from your team, perhaps actually having caused you a bit of problem in the meantime. So, look, I do kind of understand why people will go for him. The biggest reason people are going for Gakpo right now is the fact that there is no midfielder options, and after Salah, Ødegaard, Saka, it's really difficult to say who is the fourth best, which is why I'm just going to play Andreas Pereira, to be honest, rather than making moves that I'll later regret. So, yeah, it's difficult to find that fourth midfielder or that fifth midfielder maybe, and I feel like people are defaulting to Gakpo, and I feel like in game week 25 in isolation, yeah, maybe he is actually not such a bad option, but there is a big risk there. There's a big minutes risk there, and certainly moving forward, he is definitely a player that is going to cause you headaches later. Maybe you will be able to navigate that using your chips, but that's not going to be the case for everyone. So for some people, all I've got to say here really is, am I telling you to avoid Gakpo? No, I am not. What I'm really saying is I'm trying to give you the other side of the story. The whole point of Avoids is to try and give like an alternative opinion and just kind of trying to explain that there are some risks, there are some drawbacks for Gakpo right now, because looking at the face of it, you've seen a player who's, you know, scored in back-to-back games. He looks nailed on because, you know, he's been starting games. You know, these other players have been injured, but maybe you don't think about that. Yeah, he looks on paper like a reasonably good pick, but there are certain problems that come with him, and I thought I would use this opportunity, this section of the video, to kind of explain some of the drawbacks of going for him, even though he is literally the most popular transfer in FPL for Game Week 25. He's number one, the most popular guy. I don't think he should be. I think there's too many drawbacks for him. I won't be going for him. Some of you guys, it might work for you, but it won't work for everyone. Just to summarize, guys, I think the basic premises of, you know, making transfers this week is that you are going to be removing players who blank and replacing them with players who double. I think that's pretty obvious, right, guys? So there is loads of players that you can potentially go for, particularly in the defense and forward positions. Even the likes of Darwin Nunez you can maybe think about, and some other players as well. So, yeah, I think that's the big piece of advice. I wouldn't be selling Rashford, and I would just make sure, more than anything, is that if you are buying players who you don't want for the long term, and this is players like, you know, maybe not so much Arsenal players, but Liverpool players, Everton players, Wolves players. I know a lot of you guys are going for players from these teams. Just make sure they are also players that you actually want to keep long term as well, unless of course you have got an exit strategy for them, and I think that's the really the big thing for this game week. Do not kind of put yourself into a corner. You could end up actually really regretting some of these double game week traps that we are going for in game week 25. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you did enjoy, please do leave a like. Really does help out the channel so much. Do subscribe. We've got some more videos coming up this week. We're going to be talking in more detail about some of the double game week players, as well as showing you a free hit draft for game week 25 as well. So make sure you've got those notifications on so you've got that content ready to go when it drops. But aside from that, guys, thank you so much for watching. Really do appreciate you guys, and I will see you later, mates. Bye-bye.